Welcome to Balancing Money. It's wonderful to be back in this break between blocks in kernel. And as per usual, I'll start with a quote, this one from the syllabus in Module 7, which talks a lot about gift giving and some of the concepts that I hope to explore with Brad today. And it's from Shunryu Suzuki, who is the man who really brought Zen to America in the 50s. And he writes, "Darkness and brightness, absolute and relative, are a pair of opposites, like front and back feet when we walk. This is a very good way of explaining oneness, or the actual function of a pair of opposites. It expresses how we apply pairs of opposites, like delusion and enlightenment, reality and idea, good and bad, weak and strong, in our everyday practice. People who feel they are strong may find it difficult to be weak. People who feel they are weak may never try to be strong. That is quite usual. But sometimes we should be strong, and sometimes we should be weak. If you remain weak always, or if you always want to be strong, then you cannot be strong in the true sense." You will see, I hope, why I choose this particular quote about pairs of opposites and their application in our daily practice to open a conversation with Brad Laughlin, who is the founder of Call Lights, a wonderful organization working for the upliftment of consciousness, really to give us all the courage to live in love, if I can put it that way, and summarize very unfairly the work of a life, Brad. And the author of this book, it's called Living with Enlightenment, which I'm thoroughly enjoying at the moment. It's taking me a long time to get through it. But Brad, I thought that I would begin with a quote from this book, where you have a whole chapter dedicated to work and money, to kind of begin in a place that will allow you to explain some of the underlying principles, this pair of opposites or polarities that you work with, and to lead us into the first exploration of money, which is really this idea of reconciliation, both reconciliation within on an individual level, reconciliation collectively with one another, and as a example, one of many, of how the language of faith and finance has never really been all that separate, which is a point that we make over and over in kernel. So the quote, Brad, if you will forgive me for this long introduction, is, "Deep in our collective are the beliefs that working and earning money have to be a struggle. Hard work is our road to salvation. Handling money is dirty. The desire for money is sinful. Being frugal and poor are the ways to redemption." Another faith and finance term. "Being wealthy means you can't get into heaven. And those are just a taste of many erroneous dogmas and attitudes around money. I also examined the opposite sides of these beliefs, most of which revolved around hedonism and carpe diem philosophy." So this is where Brad begins. It's chapter 16 of the book, if you're curious. And Brad, as I said, I wonder if you can give us some background into these opposites, right? The erroneous dogmas, handling money is dirty, we have to work for salvation, it has to be a struggle, it's sinful, or it's hedonistic, just the pursuit of pleasure. Like how do you work with these opposites? What is that really about, and the polarities? And then how do these apply to ourselves, but then also the collective? You say deep in our collective of the beliefs. So
yeah. Well, I think that so much of it stems from religion, right? Erroneous religious beliefs, long overdue to, to be rid of those. And even if somebody, I assume, well, even if someone who's listening to this call says, well, I wasn't raised in a religion, I don't believe in religion, I'm agnostic or whatever. The truth is that these collective beliefs are so powerful that they affect all of us, whether we're aware of it consciously or not. It's a collective thought that affects everyone on the planet. And most of us were raised in some kind of religion, and most of the religions, unless you were very, very fortunate and blessed to have conscious parents who didn't, instill rigid dogmas like this, but many religions do, and we get this from our parents, we get it from, the church or the synagogue or wherever we grew up, we get it from our teachers in school. The life sort of imprints us with these erroneous religious beliefs that are so old. And we're entering this new time in human consciousness where people just don't believe this stuff anymore. It's like we're done. We're we're finished with this, and it's time for something new. It's time to be finished with the long faces, and to live in joy and to embrace the world, and to embrace money, and to embrace abundance, and to embrace our sexuality, to embrace the body. And so much of this, Andy, you asked about the opposites, and how this works. And I think so much of it is about, the way we're raised in our world is to be unconscious for the most part. Like I said, unless you were fortunate enough to have some very conscious parents who raised you to live in a conscious way. We tend, when we're unconscious, we tend to chase one side of a polarity and suppress or run away from or deny or avoid the other side. So just for example, pain and pleasure. Most people on the planet, probably 99% of us are chasing pleasure and trying to avoid pain at all costs. And that's just normal. It's just life. Yet, what I've discovered from my personal experience, and sort of what my life partner and I have taught for 30 years in our nonprofit. And for those of you who don't know, my life partner had an awakening experience long ago, and so she's the one who came forward with this information, and I learned it from her, but we teach it together. And it's known as the reconciliation of opposites technique, and it's an ancient technique. It goes all the way back to the ancient mystery schools, dating back thousands of years. And most of us would recognize it. One of the paths is called Tantra. And Tantra literally means the balancing or the reconciliation of opposites. And I don't know, I think you might talk a little bit about Tantra in your course, if I'm not mistaken. I think you mentioned that to me, but I just want to point out that when I say Tantra, a lot of people, when you say Tantra, they misunderstand. They think you're talking about sexuality. That's how it's interpreted these days. And that's not what it's about. Sexuality is one aspect of Tantra. It's balancing masculine and feminine, those opposites. But Tantra really just means the reconciliation of opposites. And so what we find is, as we do that, as we balance opposites, and there are simple little techniques to do that, little journaling, little mental techniques to balance opposites, that's really when we start to awaken to a bigger picture, and to when we do that practice, we are sort of creating the conditions, let's say, for awakenings, for a flow of abundance to move through our lives, for personal happiness, for meaningful work. The guided meditation that we did today was very much about deep relaxation in the body and finding some deep peace. in the body. And what I would add to answer your question, Andy, is balance. Balance should be added to that equation. Deep relaxation, deep peace, and balance are the foundation for the awakening, for the enlightening of our consciousness. So that applies to money as well, and love as well, and so much of life. So does that help answer the question, or was there something else? Okay, all right.
Yeah, wonderful. There is one of the joys of this particular time that you are pointing at and indicating, both in the meditation and now in this conversation, is the convergence of so many different streams of thought, so many different ways of speaking, so many different languages for somehow indicating the same thing. So to illustrate some of this, the notion that the collective beliefs within which we operate, even if we don't buy into those particular dogmas, weren't necessarily raised in those religious or cultural systems, how they still impact us. You can look at it through the lens of psychology and conjure up Jung and say, well, it's the collective unconscious. Or you can look at it through the lens of game theory, which is the most mind-boggling thing to me, and something we talk about a lot in Kernel, the fundamental insight of which is that we are each other's environments. You can do all the complicated maths you want in the world and model these massive incentive structures. It boils down to this fundamental recognition. We're each other's environment that's amplified in some regards online in terms of the particular elements of psyche that is interacting. And then often we leave the body behind, which is I want to come back to that, because there's a very, very beautiful quote in your book that I'm gonna for a moment go to the opposite and practice some hoarding and just leave it for a brief moment over there before coming back. And what I want to kind of push you on here and draw out a little bit further is that you then go on and write, having talked about some of your personal experiences, and again, I will draw you on that in a moment, but you write, I realized deep in my bones that I was merely a steward of a flow of money and resources, that neither the debt nor the money was mine. I am not the owner. Whether I amass a huge debt or a huge profit, it is not mine. It is a flow of energy that I am being asked to steward. And this not being mine, it's so fascinating because it's at once a deeply personal individual insight, right? It's this balance, it's this letting go. It's like, it's nirvana, it's this breath out, right? Not the end is the beginning. I'm just, okay, it's not mine, right? It's not mine in this limited sense of the small self. And yet it's simultaneous with the collective recognition, right? Because if it's not mine, it belongs somehow in this wider circle of interaction. And I'd love to draw you a little bit on that and hear you speak a little bit more about money as a flow, about the recognition of it not being mine, whether debt or profits, where this came from, how it's affected your life.
Yeah, well, I thank you. I can tell you that was one of the greatest internal shifts of my entire life, was that realization. And it was a mental concept I was aware of. We hear people talk about this all the time, and I kind of intellectually, I sort of knew that was true. But that particular experience I had, I could share with. Would you like me to share that experience with the group? Okay, so because it was the experience that really made it drop into my cells, into my bones, and I live differently now because of that. So let me see if I can make the story succinct here. So when Leslie, my life partner, and I, about 30 some years ago, started our work, we were very guided to not charge money, to just make everything by donation. And so we were invited to travel all over the United States to different cities and do our teaching work. And we would just put a donation basket out, and say a love offering, you can offer something or not, come just join us. And it was great. It was like I was living my passion. And we didn't want to charge money. We didn't want to keep people out if they didn't have the money. And we were also teaching about generosity, I'm sure that that's part of what you talk about in your money course, is living in a flow is so much about generosity. And so we were modeling that. We were modeling generosity. But what happened was we went into so much debt. We accumulated more debt than I ever could have imagined accumulating, because I had a decent paying 9-to-5 job with a corporation, and I had accumulated. It was back in the day where credit was easy, and I had a ton of empty credit cards. They were just credit cards sitting in a drawer waiting to be used. So we used them to rack up debt, basically to pay for food and lodging, to pay our rent and to eat, to live indoors and eat food. We had to use the credit card. So we went into a lot of debt, and we kept, we live by intuition, and we just kept getting, this is what we need to do. This is the right thing to do. We need to keep doing this. And we practice what we preach, which is trusting, doing a lot of trusting. If your heart calls you to live in the gift economy in that way, then, trust that it's all going to work out. So what, there was a certain threshold when it got up there to a certain amount, like I started feeling the pressure, like, this can't really go on forever. And, I started feeling fear. Essentially, fear started coming in, and I'm sure everybody on the call can resonate with that. And so it's natural, it's normal, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, that's not really a way to live. So it doesn't exactly engender balance and peace and inner, happiness to always be in fear around not having enough money. So I kept doing I practiced what we preach, which is, everything begins in consciousness internally. It's not, we usually think we need to fix the outside first and then everything will be okay. But in reality, it's the other way around. We change the consciousness, and then the outer world manifests the mirror of that. The outer world is simply a mirror for what's inside. So I practiced that. I practiced processing my fear. I practiced, we have all kinds of techniques, and many people have their own techniques, but it's about clearing the programming that our parents and the world gave us around money. It's clearing the beliefs in lack, the beliefs in scarcity, the beliefs in, if you're living by donation, you're going to be poor. If you're an artist, you're going to be poor. All these beliefs, and that's all they are, is beliefs. And so when you shift those beliefs, truly shift them at a deep fundamental level, the outer world changes. And that's what we were teaching. And so I was just practicing that. And the debt kept going up, up and up. And I was scratching my head going, there's something I'm not getting here. There's something, and I just over months, maybe years, I kept processing myself. And finally it reached a point where it was sort of like a tipping point, I guess you could say. And I just thought, this cannot continue. I will not continue this way. I'm going to sit and process until I clear this. And I did one of our processes that we call squares. It's in one of the books that I sent you, Andy. It's a simple technique, but it's very thorough, and it helps shift consciousness. So I did this square on, I think it was abundance and lack. The opposites were, wealth and scarcity, or something like that. Debt, I think it was debt and profit. So I did a square. I really examined those opposites and my pushing and pulling around each side. We push and pull with the opposites. We have a part of us that desires it and a part of us that fears it and pushes it away. And we're doing that with everything all the time. So anyway, I did this very deep process, and I had a big breakthrough. I could feel it. And then I went into a meditation, and it was a long meditation. And I had this mystical experience. It was a deep, profound awakening where I knew the truth of that passage that you just shared with everybody, Andy. I knew it in my bones. I knew it in my cells at a deeper level than just intellectually. And the message was simple. It was that the universe provides for us. The universe provides a flow. Or we could say, we provide the flow for ourselves as well. It's not somebody outside of us doing it to us. We are that flow, our consciousness. We are that flow. And so I got it at a deep level, like, it's not my debt. I was carrying a burden of this debt. And I got it, like, I don't have to carry a burden anymore. This is the universe. This is my, whatever you want to call it, my higher self, spirit, God, whatever somebody wants to call it. It's that universal force. And that universal force provided those credit cards so that Leslie and I could literally start our organization. It was like a loan like from the cosmic bank account. And so we used the credit cards to the max, and like I said, we thought we'd be paying that off for the rest of our lives, and that was okay with us. But when I had that realization in meditation that it wasn't my debt, just as if I had $1 million in the bank, it would not be my money. That whatever I have in the bank, it's not mine. I'm the steward of that flow. And it's the universal flow of energy, of money, of love, of whatever you think of as abundance. And so, and we steward that flow in whatever way we choose to. So anyway, the punchline of the story is that I literally ran to find Leslie. And I said, Leslie, I've got to tell you what just happened. I had this intense experience and I shared it with her. And I said, I get it. It's like, I just get it in my bones now. I'm not worried at all anymore. There's no fear. And I know it's going to work out. And she said, well, that's so amazing because my spiritual guides just spoke to me. And she is a clairaudient, which means that she hears her spiritual guides telepathically. And she said, they just spoke to me and they said, we have an idea for you. They said, next time you go to travel to San Francisco or Los Angeles or Portland or Seattle or wherever you go to do your events, offer the weekend events like you normally do by donation, but then add a Monday intensive where it's a full day, like 8-hour day, and charge $100 a person, and just let everybody know that this is a fundraiser. This is to help support your nonprofit, which was the truth. Our nonprofit was supposed to be paying us a salary, but it couldn't. So anyway, we went to San Francisco like the next week, I think, to lead an event, and we followed the advice of my life partner's guides, Leslie's guides, and we held the Monday intensive, and a ton of people showed up, and we earned more money in one day than we had earned in probably a year. And like, I thought, oh my goodness, this is a great idea. And so we did it at the next city and the next city. And we paid the debt off within a few months. It was gone. And it was such a big life lesson for me that one of the most important things we can do to live in a flow of abundance is to process our own consciousness, to release fears, to release any limiting beliefs we have around lack and scarcity and so forth.
It's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for asking. I love sharing that story. I don't get to share it very often, so thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a few things that I would like to say. Just the first is when I first met Brad and he mentioned these words to me, I process consciousness and clear some of your stuff. I was like, what is this man talking about? And the delight of interacting with his work is just how simple what he is talking about actually is, which is literally like, keep a journal so simple. Keep a journal, write about experiences, particularly ones those that challenge you. Something that I really have struggled with traditionally. I write a lot, generally speaking, about the things that make me happy. But experiences you find difficult or challenging, write them. And write them floridly. Use as much paper as you want, use as many adjectives as you possibly can, and then go through the story, underline the words that have some kind of emotional polarity, some real affect for you. Make a list of those words. Use a thesaurus, and this is the part that I really love, Brad, by the way. It's like, just get a thesaurus as a spiritual companion and find out what the opposites of those words are, right? And it's fascinating. Often you won't be able to think of what the opposite of a particular word that has some affect for you is. And it's hidden in the unconscious. And the thesaurus will be like, oh, it's this, dummy. And you're like, oh, okay, great. You balance the opposites. And then the part that is not just kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, but actually kind of work in consciousness, is to then like take those opposites and offer them up to God or eternity or spirits, whatever works for you. Just say a prayer to ask them to balance that for you, because it's not about doing, it's about undoing. So I just wanted to say that, and Brad, if I've missed anything, there are some further techniques like squares and stuff, which are a little bit more involved.
It's so simple though, Andy. It's like you said, it's very basic. It's very simple. It's not complicated. And I think just to double click on the point you made there about, some words, you cannot think of the opposite. And what that is showing you is that opposite is what's in your unconscious. It's literally unconscious. You cannot think of it because you don't know it. It's back there somewhere behind you. And so the thesaurus is very helpful at waking you up to what's in your unconscious. What kind of opposite side might you be in some kind of avoidance or denial of, or whatever? It's suppressed for some reason. And sometimes just seeing that one word can create a shift in consciousness for you that changes your life. Have you experienced that a little bit with doing the work?
Yeah, for sure. I'll say, and this is one of the funny aspects of it for me, especially given that so much of Kernel, right? Like literally the very first post in the syllabus is the play of pattern, and it talks about these complementary opposites and the spectrum of possibility between them. And it's absolutely fascinating, because when you first hear this kind of like very simple process described, you'll think, oh, well, it's wonderful. I can go and like find the opposite. But what's really fascinating is that different days lead to different opposites, right? So like one of the deep kind of negative feelings that we might associate with experience in this world is worthlessness. Big one, worthlessness. There's so much around that. And Brad tells the story of working with that with Leslie one day and sort of thinking, oh, worthlessness, feeling worthy, feeling what is the opposite of worthlessness? And there's this moment, and you can feel it in the book, Brad. I wanted to really just thank you for it and share it a bit more widely, because it hit me like a ton of bricks. Leslie says, Brad, what about arrogance? And it's fascinating, right? It's because it illuminates the multidimensionality of even this simple investigation, and it's something that I think we have kind of like stumbled on by accident in Kernel sometimes, by asking, like, what is the opposite of scarcity? Is it really is it really abundance? And like, no, maybe it's reciprocity. There's good reasons for that things, right? So these enormously simple practices, the commitment to do them, and then the kind of bloody mindedness to do it every day, or something like that, is a big part of what I hear Brad talking about when it's like this. What I hear in your story, and what I really want to like touch on again, and perhaps come back to in my next question, is that it's not this kind of naive 60s hippie, oh, just like trust in the flow, man. There's there's a lot of work that is being done to really understand the internal processes that lead to our perception of the world, right? And like in Brad's story, although he relates it in such a disarmingly direct and practical sense, you can feel the resonance of so much other work that exists in like deeply academic field. I mean, touch of one is David Grieber's work in anthropology and his deep understanding of debt, which is ultimately all about this question: to whom are you indebted? Right? Who is all the debt owed to? Right? $800 trillion of global debt. Who is it all owed to? A very deep question to actually ask, right? And Grieber's whole work is precisely about the same thing in a slightly different language. Again, right? It's that you go through this process of recognizing, oh, I'm indebted to my parents. Oh, I'm indebted to my teachers. Oh, I'm indebted to the sage. Oh, I am the sage. There's no, the debt is part of the process, right? There's no one with whom the buck really stops, right? That final kind of recognition. So I love that, Brad, and I'm so grateful for you to share that. I wanted to draw us into just like one other dimension of this, which is that sort of toward the very end of that chapter, you say the essential nature of money is that of pure energy. In order for us to steward this flow properly, there are qualities we must cultivate: generosity, love, compassion, faith, gratitude, truth, and yin-yang balance. This is amplified later when you tell the story of the Kong man who talks about kaya. Right? It's a lovely word in their language, kaya, which means wealth, right? And wealth is defined there as literally the ability to make goods travel around. Right? So wealth is like equivalent to this responsibility, this huge responsibility to be generous. And you tell the story in this book of this young man coming to a retreat of yours, and there's some funny aspects to it to do with this notion of stewarding the flow, pure energy, and its call, its invitation to real selfless generosity. I wonder if you'd be willing to share that story and perhaps
Yeah.
explain.
No, that's such it's I would think, I'm sure it's going to be singing to the choir. I'm sure your group knows this principle forwards and backwards, having taken your course. But a good friend of mine is Charles Eisenstein, and he wrote a book called Sacred Economics, which I just love and really recommend to everybody. And I think you all have read that book, you said, is that right?
We recommend it. We're aspiring readers.
Okay. Well, it's a fantastic book, and there are many wonderful books out there about sacred economics, as he calls it, and living in the flow. But one of the stories Charles told in that book was, like you said, there was an anthropologist who went to live with the San Bushmen in Namibia. And by the way, I have to compliment you, Andy, on your pronunciation of those words. I cannot pronounce the clicks. I just can't do it. My American mouth won't make the word sounds. But you can correct me if you want to. But this anthropologist went to study with the San Bushmen. He went to study them and live with them. And he said to the chief, he was talking about the concept of wealth, which is called, how do you pronounce it, Andy? Kaya? Kai?
That'll do.
Sorry? Kai? Kaya.
Kaya.
So that's their word for wealth. And he asked the chief about this word, and he said, so how do you determine who is the wealthiest person? The wealthiest man is actually what he said. And he said, is it the person who has the most kai or beads, the kind of the trading beads, or is it the person who has the most possessions? And the guy, the chief, looked at the anthropologist like he was kind of nuts, and he said, no, that's not what it means. And he tried to explain what it means, but it was difficult. And I guess the essence of the explanation was, it's essentially the wealthiest person is the one who helps make the goods go around, travel around. So it's literally like a chief who might be receiving a lot of goods, but shunts them around to other people, or to share them. And so it's literally like what he's literally saying is wealth in that culture is about generosity, not about hoarding. And when I read that, I just thought, wow, imagine our culture. Imagine how different we would be if generosity were revered just as wealth or hoarding. Like wealth in our culture is hoarding. So imagine if that consciousness shifted, would be massive. And so, that's always been my passion, is generosity and the qualities of the heart that you read there, Andy, from the chapter. But so there's a lot more that can be said about it. But what happened for me was I was leading a retreat in here. My life partner is South African, and so we live in South Africa part of the year. We've lived here on and off for 22 years, and we lead retreats here. And I was facilitating a retreat in Timbavati out at a friend of ours runs a center called the White Lion Protection Trust, and she's reintroducing the white lions back into their endemic range. And so I was co-leading a retreat out there, teaching at one of her retreats, actually. And there was a San Bushman, a young man. He was in his 20s, and he's from Namibia, and he was there. So I took the opportunity to ask him. I said, tell me more about this. I know this principle from reading about it, but is it true, number one? And number two, what's your experience of it? So he said, yes, it's absolutely true. He said, when I live with my family out in the desert, we don't need money. We don't use money, because literally possessions are not an asset necessarily, because they have a high carrying value. In other words, you're indebted by carrying things. You want to be mobile when you're out there. The way that we feel more secure is when we're generous, when we give and share. The value is in the relationships. And so if we're ever in need, all of our friends in our community will want to help us. They will want to give back to us. They will feel a sense of gratitude for what we gave them and remember that and want to give to us, or they will feel a sense of indebtedness in a way, if you want to use that word. I don't think they would use that word, but just the sense of wanting to give to you when you're in need. And so he said, that's how we live. We literally don't use money because possessions are a burden. You literally have to carry them. And then he said at the very end of his response, we laughed hysterically. He said, but wait a minute, that's until I need money for my cell phone. then I need money. And I just thought, oh, wow. Like, the modern material world has reached the vast reaches of the Namibian desert. So they do live that way most of the time, but the long arm of our financial system reaches everywhere nowadays.
Yeah. There's a page in the Kernel websites which summarizes the words of a man called Paul Myburgh, who lived with the Kwikwe near Namibia for 7 years. And
is it Paul? Did you say Paul Myburgh?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
I know him. He lives in my neighborhood in Blida. That's amazing.
Yeah. He lives there. He also occasionally serves as a barista in a tiny little town.
Cape Town.
Yeah. It's called Hot Bay. I ran into him randomly once making coffee. He made me the most exceptional coffee I have ever drunk in my life. I asked him, I said, Paul, why is a man like you making coffee? He looked at me directly in the eyes. He didn't stutter or hesitate once. He says, it's not what you do that counts. It's how you are when you're doing it. And then he made me literally the most heartwarming cup of coffee I have drunk in my entire life. This man says how he comes from a place ahead in time where we have forgotten that language, and he vows or commits to serve as a bridge between those two worlds. And what you say really, it calls it up for me, and the way that you discuss it in the book is really fascinating, because he says I have to buy time for my cell phone, and that link between this universal flow of energy and time is such a fascinating one for me, in terms of how it is bound together into a particular bundle or matrix of perception by what you call like the modern financial system, right? That like it binds it together almost irreversibly, and then sort of pretends like that's not the case anymore. There's this notion of time and the value with which we are willing to part in order to get it, value
Yeah.
that we assign to it.
Yeah. It's
It
so
reminds me,
distorted. It's so
yeah,
distorted, isn't it?
please, yeah, distorted in, I must say, if you'd like to explore that more, please.
Oh, was there more you were going to say? I didn't want to interrupt you.
Well, um, it. I have the story in mind, which I was not intending to go into, but it calls to me now, which is I have really been touched by the kirtan singing of a man called Krishna Das. Whenever I'm sad, I put on Krishna Das. He's a wonderful, wonderful singer and very funny man. I love the fact that there's this Brooklyner singing, deep Hindi. It's just so significant of the times that we live in. And he tells this story about going back to India after Maharaji's death. Maharaji is his guru, and he goes to the temple where Sri Ma is offering prasad on a particular holy day, as was always the case at this particular temple. And he's there for a few weeks beforehand. He thinks about leaving, and Ma says, "No, you can't leave until you see Maharaji's big form." Krishnadas, in this very off-pat Brooklyn way, what the hell, Maharaji's big form? What is this Indian woman on about? And he decides he loves her, and she's an incredible lady, and he decides to stay. And he says he's sitting there on the day. There's thousands of people, moving through the temple. It's India. It's chaos. It's color. It's wonder and tragedy and everything all mixed together. Almost unspeakably. Thousands of people moving through the temple. He kind of goes over to the one side and he meditates there for a period of time, and he has this experience where he sees Maharaji, but Maharaji moving every person from all over India, picking them up out of their homes, getting them up, putting them on the bus, moving the bus to the temple, unloading the bus, getting the people through. And there's this massive circle, this huge circle, just this Maharaji's big form. And Krishna Das says it's so powerful an experience for him because the Bhagavad Gita says exactly the same thing about Krishna. When Krishna reveals his true form to Arjuna, Krishna is come as time, right? And all of these masks, all of these faces are moving through in this vast and endless procession. And when, for me, that just the word time in that Sandman's response to you is what calls that up for me in the sense of that's what we value, right? Is to see the dance, to be in that flow of time and energy, which is equivalent to saying to be timeless, right? When you're in the timelessness, then there's no way that any system of separation, no matter how it's instituted, can ever deceive you about assigning value to time, right?
That's a great insight, Andy. Yeah, absolutely. And I think isn't that so much of when we struggle, isn't that so much of what we struggle with? That it's the system of separation that we have been deceived by. All of the places where we suffer, quote unquote, where we experience suffering, it has to do with being deceived by the system of separation, and it's seeing through that illusion that brings us into a unified consciousness, which is what it's all about. That's when we experience our connection. It's when we experience, seeing there's no such thing as time, that we can't be fooled that we need to buy time. We can't, we can't be fooled that we're separate from each other, that we're disconnected, that we're separate from nature. That is the ultimate illusion. And so I feel like that's so much of what these stories are about. The story of my little story that I told about money. It's literally letting go of the separation around money. If you know that you are the steward of a flow, then you are literally one with that flow and one with the money and one with the love and whatever it is at the time. So anyway, I really appreciate your point. It's a very well thought through point, and I appreciate that.
It's a blessing and a curse to be able to think through stuff well. I do want to sort of hand it over. I have one more thing to come back to, which was what I hoarded earlier, and I couldn't bear to leave this without giving that back up, which is, you write, now we are here to live and work in the world, and to find spirit in everything, including relationships, sex, money, and work. The path of embodiment is an evolutionary imperative. And I would love for you to describe that path just a little bit further, and if you would be so kind, and if it comes up, to link it to your concept of skywalking.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, it's a big topic, so I don't know how much we have time for, but let's see. I completely lost what I was just going to tell you. Got overwhelmed by your question. Can you give it to me again, please?
Of course. The path of embodiment is an evolutionary imperative. And I wonder if you can describe that, and if it comes up.
Well, what I wanted to talk about is, in the guided meditation, we were talking about feeling Mother Earth, feeling Gaia, feeling our connection with her. And literally, I think so much of the separation that we experience from these religious beliefs, let's call them, has to do with the teaching that we are separate from the earth, we are separate from spirit, and we are separate from each other. So literally those three things, it's spirit and the earth and our fellow humans. And so the path of embodiment is very much about, let's say, embracing the feminine, I would call it. It's sort of like one of the key principles is the reconciling of the two opposites of masculine and feminine, or yin and yang. And for so long, for so many millennia, during this age of patriarchy, the age of separation, whatever you like to call it, the feminine principle has been suppressed. And literally, it's in the language. If you look at the word mother, the Latin is mater, M-A-T-E-R, and that translates as matter in our current modern English version. Matter, material world of matter. And so, literally, we are embodying, we are literally seeing that we are not separate from matter, from the mother, from Gaia, from these bodies, from each other. This is the illusion. This is the illusion of separation. Has to do with the suppression of the feminine principle. I know this is very kind of broad brushstroke, but to me, it's very important. It comes to the heart. It comes to the essence of the work that we're here to do, I think, which is bridging those two worlds, bridging those opposites of yin and yang, or masculine and feminine, whatever you like to call it. So literally, we are becoming comfortable with energies that have been suppressed for thousands of years. If you look at the traditional Taoist lists of the yang words and the yin words, yang being masculine, yin being feminine, so-called, if you look at that yin list, those are states that most people don't want to go, they don't want to go there. It's things like paradox. We avoid paradox at all costs in our modern world. It's formlessness. It's the hidden. It's the unknown. Like these are things people avoid. It's the human ego that literally, we've been conditioned to want to live in the known and the form and the structures of the world. The ego is not happy with the formlessness and the unknown and the lack of structure and paradox. So, and there's more. You could look at the whole list and talk about it in these terms, but essentially, that whole field has been suppressed. It's in the collective unconscious, as Jung would call it. And so literally, we're in a process right now of what some people call embodiment, which is literally undoing those religious beliefs of separation, those erroneous beliefs of separation, and embracing our masculine qualities, our feminine qualities. It doesn't matter if you're in a male body or a female body. We all have masculine and feminine inside each one of us. We're both and we're neither. And so it's literally a process of integrating the two and making whatever's unconscious conscious for us. So that's part of it. The embodiment also includes seeing through the illusion that we are separate from Gaia herself, from the earth, from the natural world. Quantum physics is proving this. The sages and enlightened masters throughout the ages have talked about it. And finally, quantum physics is coming up and saying, why is it that what appears to be the material world is actually 99.9% space, more than that? How can that be? Well, the spiritual masters of the world have talked about this for ages. So we're in this time right now where many, many people are waking up to the illusion that we are separate from the world, from each other, separate from spirit. The religions tell us we need to go through the priest to find heaven or to find God or whatever you want to call it. And that's, couldn't be farther from the truth. It's inside us. The divine is inside us. So you asked me to tie this into skywalking. And I guess what I would say to kind of create a bridge there is that let's define the principle of skywalking. What we call skywalking is essentially living on your faith. It's what I described in my story as, we were walking on our faith. We knew we were following our hearts, and our hearts were telling us to do this thing of offering everything by donation and not charging money. And so we followed that, and we put the call of our heart first. We put our generosity first. We put our spiritual path first. We put our desire for spiritual awakening first. We put our service of other people first. We put all kinds of things that were our passions. We put those as the priority of our lives. And that involves a lot of faith, because it's not necessarily rewarded in our culture, right? What's rewarded is greed and hoarding. Those are what are encouraged and rewarded. And so when you live a life like we're describing, a life of consciousness, a life of service, a life of love, a life of creativity, it's never about the money per se, but what I have found, my experience of it has been, and the spiritual teaching is that when we put those other things first and we follow the call of the heart, that's when the universe responds, and a flow of abundance pours through like we could never imagine. I look at the flow of abundance in my life, and sometimes I just have to pinch myself. And I've never put money first. I've never avoided it either. I've processed my consciousness around it, so that I don't have those fears and desires. That's both. The desire is the pulling towards, and the fear or the repulsion is pushing away. So it's very much about integrating those two things, looking at, nothing's wrong about either one, by the way. It's just looking at and examining, where do we have the desires? Where do we have the fears? How is that supporting us? How is it limiting us? So it's this examination and processing, as I call it, looking at the opposites, looking at, it's literally making the unconscious conscious. So to come back to the skywalking, what I'm saying is that when we put those aspects of higher consciousness first, that's when we don't have to make the money happen. We don't have to figure it all out. It's when the universe provides. That's when you get, what we call synchronicities happen. You meet the right person, you're at the right place at the right time, things unfold magically, and voila, you get to manifest your dream job or your dream project, or you get the money you need to do it, or the people show up, the resources show up in a seemingly magical way. But it's not magic, and it's not any kind of hocus pocus. It's not any kind of mystery. It's not a miracle. I would call that cause and effect. It's literally that when you live that way of what we call skywalking, living on your faith, living in love, living in all those qualities that we've talked about today, living in courage, the heart, core, living those qualities, that's when you create the conditions where anything's possible. Potentials are there for you when you create those conditions. And that's when extraordinary abundance, extraordinary flow, extraordinary opportunities come your way. And the skywalking, just to complete on that, the skywalking, the word skywalking came from the movie Star Wars. Leslie, my spouse, coined the phrase. She said it's just like Luke Skywalker. He was the only one who hit the target. Remember that scene at the very end of the first movie where there was the Death Star that was about ready to blow up a planet, and he had one opportunity to hit a little target that was about 1 meter by 1 meter, and he had to go through all the enemy in his little spaceship. He had to go through all the enemy fighters, and all of his comrades were being taken out, and they were all using their headgear that was technology, was telling them how to go and where to shoot and everything. And how did Luke succeed? He took the headgear off. Remember that? He thought, I know Obi-Wan told me, trust in the Force. So he literally took the headgear off and he closed his eyes, I think, and he just guided his little spaceship in there, and he shot the thing and it hit the target, and that blew up the Death Star. So it's a great metaphor. I mean, it's cheesy, it's a little cliche, but it's a great metaphor, because that is skywalking. Luke Skywalker was the metaphor for that principle of trust in the Force. Follow your heart, use your intuition, live in a flow. Anyway, I know this kind of sounds sort of like you said, 60s-ish and hippie-ish. So I don't want to go there.
No, we love cheesy. We we love cheesy. We love it up. Truly, cheese is incredible. Once upon a time I considered becoming vegan, but the thoughts of being without cheese, it was too much for me to bear. So, I'm a South African boy. I managed somehow to do without biltong and other things in a vegetarian life, but the cheese, it was
Okay, all right.
the line at which I drew, no further than this. We have sort of come to close to the end of our allotted time, and I did want to allow for some room for questions from others. So I have a few kind of like closing remarks, but I wonder first of all if there is anybody that's if some question, comment, insight, or just any series of words is on your heart that has come up in the course of this conversation you would like to share it. There is now some time to do so. And please accept my apologies for taking so long to get to this.
There's somebody who wrote something in there. Do you want to?
I could read it out if you'd like. Just putting it out there in case somebody else has a question.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So thanks, Brad. A lot of this resonated with me. For a while, I've noticed that different people have different relationships with money, and it's been I don't know, some of my work for myself to like start to collect and hear different people's relationships with money, and understand how it's such a fundamental part of how we see ourselves, right? Even though Andrew was talking about the sense of worth and value, and these words, these economic words we use to describe ourselves. And so, so like there's and some of them that resonated with me are growing up in North America, sort of lower middle class. It was all about saving money for a rainy day and investing it in safe things, and recognizing at some point that like reading and hearing about like Randians who see your accumulated or money accumulating towards you as some kind of signal that you're giving value to the world, or Roma people here. I live now in Bulgaria, where there's more of a sense of a different ethical sense with money, which is make a transaction fair to the poor person on that transaction. And I'm hearing here something that I've noticed with a certain type of company builder treats money as a way to help attract good people and create a good space for them, right? Which I sensed some connection with what you were saying, this sense of wealth being the distributor. So my question was this idea of wanting to give to those in need, and connecting that to the idea of debt and repayment, which in some ways are very similar, in some ways are opposites. And we're here in Kernel trying to design programmable currencies, largely for altruistic purposes. And I see something here about helping shift people's relationship with money towards these things that are healthier. So any thoughts on how to do that? And as a particular opposite here, like blockchains are designed to hold balances in the point in time, and as that state changes, those balances change. And that felt to me to be a sort of, on one hand, very unforgiving, and on the other hand, we see that it's freeing in other ways. So any thoughts on how we can, what we could think about to help design our currency systems to serve this?
Absolutely. I definitely have something to say about it. I'm not a techie and I'm not a financial person, but what I know to be true is that which we create is a reflection of our own consciousness. So if you're creating new currencies, the most powerful thing you can possibly do is process yourself, process your own consciousness, so that you hold a balanced, awakened, heart-centered, loving, generous, grateful consciousness. And if you're living in that state, or let's say the more that you live in that state, the more your creation will reflect that consciousness. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I don't have a practical, like I couldn't design a currency for you in terms of like knowing, well, if we do this and we do that, then that's gonna help with the generosity. We'll reward generosity this way, and we can do this other thing. It's like you will be able to do that yourself when you're living in that state. That's how that works. We can't. It's sort of like Einstein said. You can't create a solution to a problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. So if you raise your consciousness to these other levels, you will create the solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have a feeling, as you're telling the story, one of the stories, I had this image of because the techniques that you've shared and that you and Andy were describing seemed very interesting and helpful to me. And I was imagining myself as I was imagining you walking into a bank and me being like a bank loan manager, and you have this T-shirt that just says like the universe is my collateral, and and I'm like, I'm gonna have to check with my manager about that. but so I'm on that level, and yeah. But something about these techniques that you've described about looking for opposites in your own mind and exposing those, is that, yeah, again, I'm looking for practical steps for what you're describing. It's to look within and to find these things and to be in the right place to see the world in a certain way, right? So
okay, I can give you another example. Like it's difficult to, well, the word you used was practical. I'm looking for something practical. So what's the opposite of practical, Salim?
Fun. Okay.
I have a word that comes to mind from, but what about you? There's no rules. There's no right and wrong.
I was thinking practical in the sense of like next steps for me to get to this place. So
okay.
Yeah, so I would say the opposite would be something like the destination, and practical in the sense of the first step you choose to take, something like that.
Okay, well, okay, I have a few things I can share with you. So a really practical step is to practice these techniques that Andy was describing. They're not hard to learn. Andy, you can share the title of the books and where to get them. But learning those techniques would be a very practical next step for anybody who's interested in, like, if you resonate with what I'm saying about, change yourself and you change the world is the concept. So it's not the other way around. So that's the principle: change yourself and change the world. So the simple processes are a very practical next step for you. But I guess where I was going with that, a question for you about the opposite of practical, is because, the truth is, like, if you talk to a banker, it's not practical at all. What we're talking about is not practical. The opposite for the banker would be something like airy-fairy or ridiculous, or I don't know, impractical. But though that's a good process. That's a good set of polarities to work with, because we do seem like, when we talk about this with people who are truly completely confined by third dimensional belief systems, they're not going to buy into what we're doing here. They're not going to believe it. So it's sort of like we have to get comfortable in ourselves with this principle and use it for ourselves, rather than thinking about, going into a bank and trying to get money with that. But I want to just give you one practical example. This is a really good example of like that this works. It's what the most miraculous thing that has happened to me recently is that a foundation in London approached me out of the blue a few months ago, offering to support and amplify the work that I'm doing, the work that my organization does. And they have offered an unbelievable amount of resources to do this that I never would have dreamed of. I didn't search for it in the practical way, in the traditional way. But what I know to be true is that when we shift our consciousness, when we process away all of the unconscious stuff, the fears, the limitations, the habits of thinking and so forth, when we process that stuff away, we are literally, like I said, creating the conditions for which all these so-called miracles can manifest, including extraordinary abundance. So I offer you that example just because it continues. This has been 30 years now that I've been working this way. And I'm telling you, I've watched it happen, not just in my life, but with many, many, many people. So I highly recommend it. If you don't resonate with the tools that we teach, many people out there are offering consciousness clearing techniques. You need to find something that works for you and use that to find your way to shift your consciousness. Does that help? I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. I get the sense of kind of evaporation as you describe that, in terms of, yeah. So thank you. It's very helpful.
Good.
Incredible. I have a secret master plan in which Brad comes back, 5 seasons from now, and we open a code editor and we whip out a Solidity file and we're like, okay, Brad, how do we design this code? It was not for today. The one aspect that I will say very briefly before perhaps just drawing us to a close of the quotes, also from Brad's book, is that Brad, in one of the things that I read, he's talking about how we are stewards of the financial flow entrusted to us, and therefore it is always important to be impeccable in our behavior. And I think that this is a key for me, certainly, as somebody who does think about designing currencies and tries to at least embody some of what we've talked about today. Is this notion of impeccability is really, really interesting on multiple different levels, both in the same sense of oh, it's not mine, is this individual personal realization that nevertheless links to some kind of larger collective circle or project. Impeccability has to do with where I place my focus and attention and energy in any given moment. Am I totally accountable? Am I totally efficient? Am I totally exact with that? Not in a capitalist worker, good boy efficiency kind of sense, but just really in tune, in harmony with the flow that we've been talking about. But that impeccability, I think, can be easily translated into the kind of incentive structures that get out of the way of the flow. That's, for me, if there's one thing that we can transmit from these kinds of from this particular way of speaking and this particular perception of the world to people who are doing the low level protocol work and the currency design itself, is what you're trying to do is not create structure, is remove it. How do you write code that removes structure? It's a wonderful paradox. It's ultimately in question, right? How do you write structure that removes it? It's a very interesting paradox to ponder, I suppose. Something that I've been lacking.
What they call a Zen koan, for sure.
Exactly. Yes. So I thought perhaps if everyone's available for it, and we are 5 minutes over, so I'm assuming if you're here, you still have just a little bit of time. I will read a quote, and Brad, if you would be willing to just 5 minutes to sort of close us out in some kind of brief meditation, that would be amazing. Now, I tricked everybody into this conversation with the word Ubuntu. And I thought, we would try and embody it rather than talk too much about it. But there is a wonderful quote from chapter 17 in Brad's book, which goes like this. We are at the most pivotal moment ever in the evolution of human consciousness, poised to make the leap into a new paradigm of love. The philosophy of Ubuntu, born out of the wisdom of indigenous knowledge and the power of community, tells us that the basis of our very humanity is the practice of loving kindness and generosity. This is the most ancient spiritual injunction in the world. Our survival depends on it. Through practicing Ubuntu, we can accelerate the tipping point into love. Thank you so much for it.